Lady Mary Ashworth didn't believe in love. Or at least, she didn't believe in the kind of love her mother so often praised in the sugary romances she insisted on reading. But there she was, at 24 years old, on the verge of being condemned for what her elder aunt called the crime of spinsterhood. She never imagined that, in trying to avoid an unwanted suitor, she would end up saying something so wrong that it would change her life forever. "Yes, I accept," she murmured distractedly, unaware that Lord Cedric Albury, the most sought-after bachelor of the season, was kneeling before her, and not merely to pick up her fallen handkerchief. Cedric raised his eyes. "You accept? My God, Mary, I thought I'd have to plead. Your answer feels like a miracle." Mary froze. The ballroom came to a standstill. The orchestra fell silent, as if even the violins sensed the impending disaster. Mary was known for her wit and sharp tongue, but at that moment she felt reduced to a marble statue. Her brown hair, always impeccably styled, seemed to suffocate her, much like the expectations society placed on young ladies. Cedric, on the other hand, was dazzling in his gala attire, with amber eyes that gleamed like an enigma, hiding something deeper than mere affection, something he would never dare reveal. "There's been a mistake," Mary began, but her voice was drowned out by the growing murmurs of the surrounding guests. Her mother, Lady Marjorie, was already on the verge of tears, exclaiming for anyone who would listen, "My Mary, betrothed to an Albury, it's almost a miracle!" What Mary didn't know was that Cedric had his own reasons for so readily accepting the mistaken proposal, reasons that involved a secret agreement with his brother and a failing estate. "A marriage to Lady Mary will solve everything," he had told himself. But now, looking at the panic in her eyes, Cedric realized he might have been playing with fire. Mary was certain she was living a nightmare. How could a simple misunderstanding lead to an engagement that, in less than a week, would become a marriage? She had tried explaining to everyone, her mother, her aunt, even the family cook, that it had been a terrible mistake. But of course, no one listened. After all, who in their right mind would refuse Lord Cedric Albury? "You don't understand," she exclaimed for the 5th time that day, as her mother enthusiastically adjusted the bodice of her wedding gown with almost childlike excitement. "I never meant to say yes." "Meant to or not, Mary," Lady Marjorie replied with a triumphant smile. "Fate sometimes pushes us toward decisions we don't realize we want, and this is a wonderful fate, my dear." Mary felt like screaming. Her wedding dress was the epitome of Regency grandeur, ivory silk with delicate lace and a veil that looked like a cloud. But she felt like a prisoner dressed for her execution. On the other side of the city, Cedric was grappling with his own conflicts. In his Mayfair residence, he paced his study, taking sips of whiskey more frequently than considered polite. His elder brother, Thomas, the Duke of Hawthorne, watched him with a half-smile. "You should be elated," Thomas teased. "It's not every day a man solves 2 problems at once, a beneficial marriage and financial salvation." Cedric shot him a withering look. "This isn't how I envisioned proposing to someone, Thomas. It was an accident." "Accidents are opportunities in disguise," Thomas retorted. "And, if you'll allow me, Miss Ashworth seems exactly the kind of woman who will keep you in check." Cedric sighed. The truth was, he was torn. Mary was not like other young ladies of society. Her sharp tongue and inquisitive eyes unsettled him, even intrigued him. But Cedric also knew he couldn't afford to back down. He needed this marriage, even if it meant lying. On the morning of the wedding, Mary had her last chance to escape. While the maids adjusted her veil and the flowers were being delivered, she took the hand of her closest friend, Penelope, and whispered, "I'm going to run away." Penelope blinked, shocked. "Run away? Mary, are you mad? Cedric might be a fool, but he's a very rich and very handsome fool, and your mother would probably have a fit if you even considered it." "Maybe I want her to have one," Mary replied, in a tone bordering on desperation. "I can't marry someone I barely know." But when the music began and she saw Cedric waiting at the altar, something made her stop. It wasn't fear, nor doubt. It was curiosity. As the ceremony progressed, Cedric appeared calm, but his mind was a whirlwind. Mary was beautiful, yes, but there was something in her eyes that made him feel she could shatter him with a single word. He knew he would need to be cautious. very cautious. "Repeat the vows," said the vicar. Cedric took a deep breath. "I, Cedric Albury, take you, Mary Ashworth, as my lawful wife, to love, protect, and honor, until death do us part." Mary repeated the vows, almost as if in a trance. But as she spoke the final words, something caught her attention, a shadow of unease on Cedric's face. She didn't know he carried a secret that could destroy not only their marriage, but everything he had built. At the end of the ceremony, Cedric leaned toward Mary and whispered with an enigmatic smile, "Welcome to my life, Lady Albury. I hope you're prepared." "Prepared for what?" she asked, suspicious. "To deal with me," he replied, before guiding her to the carriage. That night, as the wedding celebration unfolded in grand style at the Albury estate, Mary decided to confront Cedric. He had avoided her throughout the entire event, which only deepened her suspicion that something was amiss. "Why did you agree to this marriage so quickly?" she asked sharply, when she finally found him alone. Cedric raised an eyebrow, but maintained his composure. "Let's just say I have my reasons. And you, Mary? Why didn't you run away?" Mary opened her mouth to reply, but realized she didn't know. There was something about Cedric, something she couldn't understand, but that kept her there. Mary's first night as Lady Albury was nothing like she had imagined, not that she had imagined much. The marital suite at the Albury estate was grand, adorned with furniture that exuded opulence, but it felt somewhat cold, as if someone had tried to mask the family's troubles with layers of gold and marble. It was the kind of place meant to impress, but all Mary could think about was how out of place she felt. Cedric appeared at the door, impeccably dressed, which irritated her even more. "Are you comfortable, Lady Albury?" he asked, with that easy smile that made her distrustful. He seemed calm, but Mary knew that behind that polished facade, there was something he didn't want to reveal. "Why do I feel like I'm the only one asking that question?" Mary shot back, crossing her arms. "You don't seem particularly uncomfortable with this situation." Cedric shrugged and stepped closer, stopping at a safe distance, as if it were dangerous to get too near her. "My dear, you're not the only one who's been dragged into this. I thought we might at least enjoy our mutual unhappiness together." Mary raised an eyebrow. "Unhappiness? Are you implying you're not thrilled to have married me? Because honestly, that would be a relief." Cedric laughed, but didn't reply. He changed the subject, which only fueled her curiosity. Later that night, while Cedric disappeared to deal with urgent matters, Mary decided to explore the house. There was something about the property, or perhaps about Cedric, that left her feeling uneasy. She found his study, a dark room filled with books. On the desk, there was a messy pile of papers. She hesitated, but curiosity won. After all, she had a right to know who she had married. "You know, sneaking into your husband's study on your first day as a married couple isn't exactly the best way to build trust," said a voice behind her. Mary spun on her heels, nearly toppling the stack of papers. Cedric stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and an amused glint in his eyes. He didn't look angry, which was even more unsettling. He had been expecting this. "Trust isn't exactly the foundation of this marriage, is it?" she shot back, trying to keep her composure. Cedric stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "And what were you expecting to find here, Mary? My journal? Some dark secret?" Mary didn't reply, but something in his expression shifted. The smile vanished, replaced by a more serious look. "Are you searching for answers, Lady Albury? Because if you are, maybe it's time for some truths." Cedric sat in the leather armchair by the fireplace and gestured for Mary to take a seat as well. Reluctantly, she complied, but kept her eyes fixed on him, as if he were a puzzle about to be solved. "This marriage for me was a matter of necessity," he began. "The Albury estate is drowning in debt. My brother believes a beneficial union would save our family." "Ah, so I'm just a convenient solution to your problems," Mary replied, her voice sharp. Cedric gave a faint smile but continued. "It's not just that. There's something else. Something my family doesn't know. Something I hope you'll never have to know either." Mary frowned. "And why shouldn't I know? Do you think I'm incapable of handling secrets, Lord Albury?" Cedric hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether to reveal more. But then he shook his head. "It's not about what you can or can't handle. It's about what I want to keep away from you." In the days that followed, Mary tried to extract more information from him, but Cedric seemed to have built a wall between them. However, she noticed something curious. There was a pattern to the times he disappeared. He always left the house at nightfall, returning only in the early hours of the morning, and he always seemed more tense afterward. One night, Mary decided to follow him. She swapped her nightgown for something more practical, a decision that would have scandalized all of high society, but Mary didn't care. Armed with a lantern and a pounding heart, she followed Cedric to the stables. He mounted a horse and rode toward the forest. Mary followed as quietly as possible, keeping her distance. The trees around her cast eerie shadows, but she refused to turn back. After what felt like hours, Cedric stopped in a clearing, where another hooded figure awaited him. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the tone was tense, almost threatening. Mary held her breath as the figure handed Cedric a package, which he seemed to hesitate before accepting. There was something illegal or dangerous happening, and she was determined to uncover what it was. Suddenly, a twig snapped under her feet. Cedric turned toward her, his eyes wide. "Mary? What the hell are you doing here?" She froze. I was looking for you." Cedric scoffed, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her away from the clearing. "You shouldn't have come, Mary. You should never have come." Assim que o tempo de espera terminar, poderei criar a imagem correspondente a esse momento. Se precisar de ajuda com outro pedido enquanto isso, é só avisar. He hesitated for a moment before finally saying, "I'm not the man you think I am, Mary, and if you know too much, you could put yourself in danger." A chill ran down Mary's spine. She had married a man full of secrets, but in that moment, she decided she wouldn't rest until she uncovered them, even if it meant risking everything. Mary wasn't the type to leave things unfinished. If Cedric thought he could protect her by keeping secrets, he clearly didn't understand what it meant to be married to Lady Mary Ashworth Albury. The next morning, while Cedric was busy with his urgent business, she began her investigation. Se precisar de uma imagem ou de algo mais, é só avisar. With the help of her friend Penelope, who, though reluctant, was always easily persuaded with promises of exclusive gossip, Mary managed to gather valuable information about the Albury family's history. Cedric's brother, Thomas, was known for his impeccable reputation and strict management of the estate. However, there were whispers that Cedric had been the black sheep for years, involved in gambling, illegal races, and shady dealings to help friends in trouble. "But that was before," Penelope said as they flipped through a stack of old newspapers. "Since he returned from Bath last year, he seems different, more serious." "Different how?" Mary asked, frowning. "Well, he's no longer seen at clubs or nighttime events," Penelope explained. "They say he's distanced himself from many acquaintances. Some believe it's because he's helping Thomas save the estate, but there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Mary asked, leaning forward. Penelope hesitated. "That he's involved in something dangerous, something that could cost him more than just money." Later that day, Mary was in the estate's library, examining some of the papers Cedric kept carefully locked away. They were filled with calculations, names, and financial transactions that made no sense to her. But one name caught her attention: Matthew Hargrave. She had heard that name before, at one of her mother's many parties. Hargrave was a man known for being as charismatic as he was treacherous, a businessman with a reputation for amassing wealth through dishonest dealings. A chill ran down Mary's spine. What could Cedric possibly be doing with someone like him? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. She quickly piled the papers back in place, but not fast enough. "You're becoming quite the busybody, Mary," Cedric said, standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. Mary raised her chin defiantly. "You leave me no choice. I won't live with a man who seems to be hiding something that could destroy us both. So please clarify, who is Matthew Hargrave, and why is his name in your papers?" For a moment, Cedric remained silent, but then he sighed and closed the door behind him. "If I tell you, you'll have to swear not to tell anyone, not even Penelope." Mary blinked, surprised. "You know about Penelope?" She's as discreet as an elephant in a china shop, Cedric replied with a touch of humor. Now swear it. She hesitated, but eventually nodded. I swear. Cedric pulled out a chair and sat down, looking suddenly much more tired than she had ever seen him. Matthew Hargrave is a blackmailer, he began. He has information about my family that, if exposed, would destroy not only the estate, but also the Albury name. And as you know, in this society, a tarnished name is worse than financial ruin. Mary felt her stomach drop. What does he want in exchange for his silence? Cedric looked directly at her. Money. A lot of money. And to get it, I've gotten involved in transactions that aren't exactly legal. Mary swallowed hard. She hadn't expected him to be so blunt. Why didn't you tell your brother? Thomas could help. Cedric shook his head. Thomas is incorruptible. He would never agree to dirty his hands, even if it were to save our family. He would rather lose everything than compromise his principles. So you decided to do it alone, Mary murmured, understanding for the first time the burden Cedric carried. I decided to protect my family, Cedric corrected, and now you are part of it. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. Cedric's revelation had left her restless, but it also made her see him in a different light. He wasn't just the reformed rake everyone gossiped about. He was a man willing to sacrifice everything for the people he loved. Yet, at the same time, he was treading dangerous ground, and Mary feared there might be no way out. The next day, Mary decided to take action. If Cedric was determined to face Hargrave, then she would do the same, in her own way. Using her connection with Penelope, who had a knack for overhearing important conversations unnoticed, Mary managed to discover where Hargrave would be that night, at an underground card game in London. Mary dressed in a dark cloak and fled the estate before Cedric noticed her absence. When she arrived at the location, a discreet club hidden among dark streets, her heart raced. She didn't know exactly what she would say to Hargrave, but she knew she had to confront him. When she entered the hall, filled with smoke and rough men, she found Hargrave seated at the main table, surrounded by cards and bottles of liquor. He was exactly as she remembered, charming, but with a smile that seemed to hide a knife. Mr. Hargrave, she said, approaching confidently. He looked up, surprised but clearly intrigued. Lady Albury, what a pleasant surprise. What brings you to a place so unsuitable for a lady like yourself? I've come to talk about my husband, Mary said, ignoring his sarcastic tone, and to make it clear that you will no longer manipulate him. Cedric looked directly at her. Money. A lot of money. And to get it, I've gotten involved in transactions that aren't exactly legal. Mary swallowed hard. She hadn't expected him to be so blunt. Why didn't you tell your brother? Thomas could help. Cedric shook his head. Thomas is incorruptible. He would never agree to dirty his hands, even if it were to save our family. He would rather lose everything than compromise his principles. So you decided to do it alone, Mary murmured, understanding for the first time the burden Cedric carried. I decided to protect my family, Cedric corrected, and now you are part of it. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. Cedric's revelation had left her restless, but it also made her see him in a different light. He wasn't just the reformed rake everyone gossiped about. He was a man willing to sacrifice everything for the people he loved. Yet, at the same time, he was treading dangerous ground, and Mary feared there might be no way out. The next day, Mary decided to take action. If Cedric was determined to face Hargrave, then she would do the same, in her own way. Using her connection with Penelope, who had a knack for overhearing important conversations unnoticed, Mary managed to discover where Hargrave would be that night, at an underground card game in London. Mary dressed in a dark cloak and fled the estate before Cedric noticed her absence. When she arrived at the location, a discreet club hidden among dark streets, her heart raced. She didn't know exactly what she would say to Hargrave, but she knew she had to confront him. When she entered the hall, filled with smoke and rough men, she found Hargrave seated at the main table, surrounded by cards and bottles of liquor. He was exactly as she remembered, charming, but with a smile that seemed to hide a knife. Mr. Hargrave, she said, approaching confidently. He looked up, surprised, but clearly intrigued. Lady Albury, what a pleasant surprise. What brings you to a place so unsuitable for a lady like yourself? I've come to talk about my husband, Mary said, ignoring his sarcastic tone, and to make it clear that you will no longer manipulate him. Hargrave laughed, a low and menacing sound. And what can you, a young wife, do about it? Mary leaned in, her eyes shining with determination. More than you can imagine. And if you don't stop, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are, starting with your partners here. Hargrave narrowed his eyes, but before he could respond, a familiar voice came from behind her. Mary, what the hell are you doing here? It was Cedric, his face pale with shock and anger. Mary barely had time to register Cedric's presence before he grabbed her by the arm, pulling her away from Hargrave's table. His gaze was a mix of worry and fury that she had never seen before. But Mary wasn't intimidated. What are you doing here? He hissed, trying to keep his voice low. Exactly what you should have done weeks ago, she replied, her voice firm. I'm solving the problem, Cedric. You're going to get yourself killed is what you're going to do, Cedric retorted, clearly frustrated. The tension between the two was palpable, but Hargrave interrupted them with a languid smile, lazily reclining in his chair. Oh, what a fascinating scene. I didn't expect Lady Albury to have so much fire. It's almost captivating. Cedric turned to Hargrave, his fists clenched. Leave my wife out of this, Hargrave. This is a matter between us. Oh, but now it isn't, is it? Hargrave retorted, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. It seems Miss Ashworth, excuse me, Lady Albury, is far braver than you, Cedric. Mary didn't wait for Cedric this time. She stepped forward and slammed her hands on the table, ignoring Hargrave's surprised look. Enough with the games. You will stop blackmailing my husband, or you'll have to deal with me. And trust me, I can be much more annoying than he is. Hargrave laughed, but there was something cold in his eyes now. And what exactly can you do, Lady Albury? Run to society and spread rumors? I doubt anyone would take you seriously. I don't need to spread rumors, Mary replied, her eyes blazing with determination. I have connections, Hargrave, more than you imagine, and I know your reputation is already far from perfect. A little push, and you'll find out that London can be very hostile to someone like you. Cedric looked at Mary, clearly torn between admiration and shock. He opened his mouth to intervene, but Hargrave cut him off. You have courage, Lady Albury, Hargrave said, slowly rising from his chair. But courage isn't enough in this world. This game is more dangerous than you realize, and as much as I admire your determination, there's no way you can win. We'll see about that, Mary retorted, refusing to back down. For a moment, the hall fell silent. Hargrave stared at her, his eyes weighing her every word. Then he laughed, a dry and sarcastic sound. Very well. Let's see what you're capable of. But a warning, my lady. When you enter games like this, there's no way out without wounds. With that, he walked away, leaving Mary and Cedric alone. Cedric turned to her, looking torn between pride and anger. Mary, he began, but she raised her hand to silence him. I know what you're going to say, she said firmly. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and I shouldn't have come. But someone had to face him, Cedric, and you wouldn't. Cedric shook his head, exasperated. You don't understand the risk you took. I understand more than you think, she replied, her voice softening. And I understand that no matter how dangerous it is, I won't stand by while you carry this alone. On the way back to the Albury estate, the silence between them was heavy. Mary stared out of the carriage window, trying to process everything that had happened. Cedric, on the other hand, seemed lost in thought. Finally, he broke the silence. You were incredible today, he said quietly. Mary turned to him, surprised. What did you say? You heard me, he replied, a small smile playing on his lips. I had no idea you were so stubborn. Well, maybe you should have married someone less stubborn, she retorted, but there was a touch of humor in her voice. Maybe, he admitted, leaning slightly toward her, but I don't think I could have chosen better. And the days that followed, Hargrave remained silent. Mary suspected he was planning something, but she decided to use the time to strengthen her position. With Penelope's help, she discreetly spread information that destabilized Hargrave's network. Cedric, though initially reluctant, began to trust Mary more, sharing details he had previously kept secret. Their relationship changed. Cedric began to see Mary not as a lady who needed protection, but as a partner. And for the first time, Mary felt she was getting to know the real Cedric, not the man society saw, but someone complex, vulnerable, and deeply loyal. But Hargrave was not out of the picture yet. Epilogue: A rebuilt future. The morning was unusually calm, considering the turmoil of the past weeks. The Albury estate, which had felt heavy with tension and secrets when Mary arrived, now exuded a newfound serenity. It was the day Hargrave would finally face the consequences of his actions, and Mary and Cedric were ready. They had discovered Hargrave's weak spot, a record of his illegal activities hidden in a remote country house managed by a careless accomplice. With the help of Penelope, who proved surprisingly adept at deciphering incriminating documents, they gathered enough evidence to pressure him. The night before, Cedric summoned Hargrave for a final meeting at the club where it had all begun. Mary insisted on accompanying him, but this time, Cedric didn't hesitate. "You are as much a part of this as I am," he said, holding her hand. At that moment, she realized she had earned his complete trust. When Hargrave arrived, his usual air of superiority was shaken. He realized something was wrong when he saw Mary seated beside Cedric, with a folder of papers open before them. Her expression was confident, almost defiant. "I hope your evening was pleasant," Mary began with a slight smile, "because I don't think you're going to like what we have to show you." Cedric opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. "Here are detailed records of your transactions with smugglers at the Bristol port, Hargrave. Just one of these papers in the hands of the Justice Minister, and you're finished." Hargrave laughed, but there was nervousness in his voice. "This is a bluff. No lady would be clever enough to find something like this." "Don't underestimate my wife," Cedric replied, his voice firm, "or her ability to make unlikely allies." Hargrave looked from Mary to Cedric, searching for an escape, but there was none. Mary leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "Here's your choice, Hargrave. You return all the money you took from Cedric and the others you blackmailed. In exchange, we destroy these proofs. But if you try anything again, all of this will go straight to the authorities." For a moment, Hargrave was silent. Then, finally, he muttered, "You've won." The following days were marked by an almost palpable relief. Hargrave kept his word, returning not only the money he had extorted, but also freeing Cedric from the burden of blackmail. The Albury estate was finally on the path to recovery. Cedric and Mary began to rebuild their life together. The marriage, which had started as a disastrous accident, now seemed to be a solid foundation for something much more meaningful. They had endured trials that brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. On the last night before leaving for their planned trip to Scotland, Cedric found Mary in the garden. She was gazing at the sky, her face softened by the silver moonlight. He paused for a moment, simply observing her, before stepping closer. "Thinking about what comes next?" he asked, smiling. "Thinking about how I got here," she replied, her eyes never leaving the sky. "If someone had told me months ago that I'd marry by accident and face blackmailers alongside a man I barely knew, I would have laughed." "But you wouldn't have run away," he said with conviction. Mary turned to him, her eyes shining. "No, I wouldn't have. I think, deep down, I always knew you'd be someone important to me. I just needed time to accept it." Cedric smiled, reaching out to touch her face. "Mary, you are the most courageous, stubborn, and incredibly brilliant woman I've ever known. And if you're by my side, I think I can face anything." "I hope there aren't any more blackmailers in our future," she joked, smiling. "If there are," Cedric replied, pulling her closer, "I know we'll be ready." As they walked back to the house, the future felt less daunting and more full of possibilities. They still had much to learn about each other, but for the first time, Mary felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, by the side of a man who not only accepted her as she was, but admired her for it. And so, amidst the gentle night breeze and the shining stars, the couple who began with an accidental yes finally found their way to a true yes. One full of love, partnership, and of course, a healthy dose of unexpected challenges. Subscribe, share, like the video.